Blessings, blessings. Good morning. My intention in making this video is to have a recollection of what changed for me and where that started. My other intention in making this video is to inspire you to love yourself fully, wholly, and completely right where you are. No matter what that means. You could be in the midst of infidelity, you could be in the midst of bankruptcy, you could be in the midst of a court proceeding, you could be in the midst of deep financial hardship, you could be in the midst of a spiritual awakening. You could have just gotten out of the hospital, whatever that means for you. You could be in the midst of a deep, dark night of the soul with depression and anxiety that's super high that you don't know how you're going to get out of it. And so my second intention is to inspire you to love yourself fully, wholly, and completely right where you are in this moment as you are. And so I was inspired to have and do this recollection because I've been listening to Eckhart Tolle's podcast every morning, and he was sharing his journey. He was sharing the memories and recollections of his journey, and that ignited and awakened something in me just now. And I said, okay, yes, I will do this. And ultimately, what brought me to this place was he spoke about his experience, and it took him a long time, many years, to fully understand what had happened to him this one particular night. And ever since that experience, he had 80% less thinking. So more of a being, an experience of life and in the present moment, and not nearly as much thinking. So the beginning of my journey, I'm going to take you back to 2011. 2011 is the year that my dad passed away. And after that happened, I went on a year binge of drinking. Now, I had already been drinking very heavily at this point, very consistently, in very, very unhealthy ways. And so this went on for years. And then when he passed away, that was an excuse for me to continue to drink and drink even more. And so that happened. And then I had this experience, which I had had many times before, of not wanting to live. And for the first time in my life, inflicted self-harm by cutting my left arm. Not deeply, not extremely painful, but to the point that I felt physical pain because I was in so much inner turmoil within the mind that I wanted to feel something physical. And so this happened twice, and I reached out to the person that I was previously in a relationship with, and she came to my aid. And I ended up staying with her for about a week. And within that week, she contacted my parents, my mom and my stepdad. And they came to the house, and the three of them did this, what I would call an intervention. And at the time, I was extremely rageful and extremely angry that this was taking place. To the point where when my mom came in the room, I refused to open my eyes. I was angry and I was speaking, but I refused to open my eyes for at least 10-15 minutes. So I finally opened my eyes. I cry, I express anger and rage. And they end up leaving however much longer. And within the next few days, I left the house of the person that I was in that previous relationship with. At that point, she was, a friend. And I went to my parents' condo, and I made arrangements within 4 or 5, maybe 6 days to enroll myself in a rehab facility. I chose to go to Florida. I didn't know how long I was going to go for. And I was terrified. I remember my mom took me to the airport, and I was so scared. So scared of facing myself, and so scared of what that was going to look like for me, and what that was going to feel like for me, and what was this new life going to be without drinking. And beyond the drinking, what was this new life going to be like as I got to know myself? And I don't really remember the plane ride. I do remember getting to the facility and doing the intake. And I remember the first week or two being really, really tough for me. And at some point, I don't know when, I don't know if it was the first week, second week, I feel like it was within one or the two, the first or the second week. The facility was, the back of the facility was connected to the bay that led to the ocean. And so in the back of the facility, there was a volleyball court in the sand. And in the back of the facility, there was this long deck. And for those of you who have never experienced any type of rehabilitation facility, it's very rigid, similar to jail. They tell you where to go, when to eat. You have to participate in these sessions and these workshops and these meetings and therapy. And that was another challenge for me, because I didn't like being told what to do, let alone when to do it or how to do it. And so I've always been a writer ever since I was a child. That was something in my first experience with therapy that I was encouraged to write so that I could release that particular trauma at that point in my life. And so I remember writing as a kid. So fast forward, coming back to being in this rehab facility, and we got about 45 minutes to an hour to eat our lunch. And I've always been a fast eater, a not so healthy habit that I developed and took on in my childhood as I watched my father just wolf down his food. And so I'm in this rehab facility, I finish my lunch, and I go out to the back of the facility, and I take this black and white composition book. I remember that's what I had. That was my journal at the time. I usually like to use pencils, so I'm not quite sure if I was using a pencil back then or a pen. Either way, I remember having this black and white composition book, and I just started writing. Couldn't even tell you what I was writing about. And I remember at some point having the awareness of the thoughts that I was having, and the thoughts that I was having were, there has to be so much more to life than this. There has to be a different way to live. There has to be a different stream of thoughts and emotions and vibrations. There has to be a different level of peace and joy that I have yet to access and experience. So day after day, I continued to write. And within this time, I'm in this facility with people who are much older than me. I was 26 at the time. And I'm in this facility. A few of them were younger. A few of them were within my age range. And majority of the people that I was in this rehab facility with were older than me. In their late 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. And that terrified me even more. My God, I'm in this place that I don't want to be. I am away from my creature comforts. I don't have anybody to comfort me. I didn't know at the time how to comfort myself. And something happened and something changed. And what changed and what happened was that I started to have these conversations with God. I started to have these conversations with my higher self. I started to have these conversations and this inner dialogue with the me that had always been me. I just simply didn't have access to this part of myself because I was numbing it with sex and alcohol. And so, just like I shared a little bit ago about Eckhart Tolle saying he had this experience this particular night, and it took him years and years to understand what actually happened. And it took him years to have verbiage and vocabulary to be able to explain what happened. And I was able to recognize just a little bit ago by listening to his podcast that same thing happened to me. I had this outer body, inner body experience day after day as I sat on this deck and I wrote in this composition book and I listened to the sounds of the water that were very, very subtle, and I was able to dig my feet in the sand and feel the sun on my skin. I remember drinking and gulping water, and what I do remember is that I wanted something different. I wanted to live from my heart. I wanted to live from a place of peace. And I didn't know what that looked like or felt like because I don't feel like I had truly ever experienced peace or joy. Because from an early age, I remember being depressed. Didn't understand what that meant. Didn't even know the word depression. But I was depressed. There were many times I didn't want to live. So it took me a long while. It took me a long, long while to understand what I had truly experienced for that month while I was in Florida. Now, after I returned back to Pennsylvania after completing the month, I still had my job. I was on short-term disability, so I was able to go back to work. When I returned back to Pennsylvania, I took about 2 weeks before I returned to work. I was staying with my parents. They have they had a one-bedroom condo, so I was staying in the living room. And I had been living on my own for 7 years at that point. So I was very much so ready to go back to living on my own. And when I left, I gave up my apartment because I didn't know how long I was going to be gone. So when I came back to Pennsylvania, I stayed with my parents. I go back to work after 2 weeks. And what do? I start developing this relationship with this woman who was 4 or 5 years older than me and also had 2 children. So I was still living with my parents, but I was staying with this woman throughout the week to make my commute easier. And that relationship went on for about 3.5 years, on and off. And that was such a pivotal time for me because I had no business being in a relationship. I was sober for 8.5 months. I started drinking again for about 6 to 8 months. And then after that time, I stopped drinking. I stopped drinking for a few years, and then I found wine, and I drank wine for a number of years. Now, I would venture to say that wine was not problematic for me. Something had happened during my time in that rehab facility, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and physically. And although I did go back to drinking and I drank wine, I never picked up hard liquor again. I never picked up, I think maybe once or twice I picked up a beer, but beer was never my drug of choice. It was always hard liquor, specifically vodka. And during these next several years, so many different things had happened. I was in this relationship on and off for about 3.5 years. Then when I was 30, after that relationship ended, I'm working at a different job at this point, still in banking, working for a different company. My grandmother, who was 87 at the time, ended up needing a stent placed in her heart. She goes in for the surgery. They realize she has 90% blockage and needs a triple bypass valve replacement. And so she opts for the surgery. She doesn't make it out, and she passes and transitions 24 hours later. Now, this whole week leading up to the surgery, the day of the surgery, and the day after when she passed away, I never left her side. I stayed there, to the point where she told me to shower because she could smell my body odor. So my grandmother passes away. At this point, I took a deep dive into spiritual text. I was reading the New Testament at the time, along with many other self-help books and spiritual books. And also at this particular time, I was deep into the New Testament, never affiliating with any specific religion, and also became a sponge and a student and wanted to learn it all. That led to reading books of Zen Buddhism. That led to reading books on Sufism. That led to reading the Bhagavad Gita and many, many, many different books. So I don't want to, I'm already at 19 minutes. I could go on and on and on. And also for the purpose of keeping your attention, I'm 38. I'll be 39 in about 3 weeks. And this journey for me started at 26. 26 is when I was at this rehab facility. The year prior is when my father passed away. The year prior, I was engaged. And my life shifted and took so many different directions and twists and turns and ups and downs and highs and lows. And I stopped eating meat, and I changed my whole lifestyle. I stopped listening to certain music. I stopped partaking in certain conversations. My relationship with my mom changed dramatically, and at the time, it didn't feel like it was for the best, and ultimately it was for the best. Fast forward to present day, I have an amazing life. I have experienced for the past year such inner turmoil with the mind that has brought me to this amazing space of clarity. And so, like I shared in the beginning, I was inspired to take myself and anyone who was called into this space on this space of reflection. And my second intention is to inspire you to love yourself and accept yourself right where you are. It could be in the midst of alcohol addiction, heroin addiction, fentanyl addiction. Maybe it's pills. Maybe it's infidelity. Maybe it's shopping. Whatever it is, wherever you are the answer. And that wholeness, that void that you're trying to fill, it's already filled. You simply got to become aware of it. And I say simply, and it's a journey. It's the hero's journey, and you are the hero. So, I love you. I'm grateful for you right where you are. And the biggest change for me is that I realized that I am me. And in the fullness of me is God. And there's no separation between the intelligence of nature and the intelligence of animals and the intelligence of the cosmos and I, Rachel Rose Myers. Rachel Rose Myers is a name. I was given and gifted the body parts of being a female. And I also resonate with both masculine and feminine energy. I resonate with being two-spirited or multi-spirited because I know that there's only one spirit. So even in the dimension of me being multi-spirited, I am one-spirited, and that spirit is love, and that spirit is divine essence. And I'm saying all of this, and I'm sharing all of this, and that does not negate or take away or mean that I don't experience all aspects of being human, because I do, and I'm grateful for it. So I'm going to leave it here. I love you. Have a beautiful day. Wherever you are loved, you are guided. Love is your protector. This too shall pass. Continue to go within, because that's where all the magic is. I love you, family.